Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're discussing the concept of media and the ways that we engage with it in an effort to discern what is true and real in the world and distinguish it from what is false and delusional. In the last few videos, we've been examining an article from Fortune magazine and looking at the language used, some of the manipulative tactics that are being employed by the writer, also some fallacies that are present within the writing. We've got a lot to cover in this video, so let's just jump right into the end of the dissection, and we'll get into some deeper material along these same lines towards the end of the video. Yeah, let's dive in. Let's examine a few more quotes. These are pulled from the article, and then we'll discuss what's going on at both the micro and macro level. Quote, "While the R&D tax credit is currently the largest permanent incentive available to the agriculture industry, it needs expansion to account for what is happening on the world stage. To remedy this, Congress must revert to its prior protocol, as well as allow a portion of fertilizer, fuel costs, and new technology investments to qualify for the R&D tax credit." Next, G7 agriculture ministers said it best when they stated recently that they are determined to do, quote, "what is necessary to prevent and respond to a food crisis," unquote. "It is our hope that Washington will join the agriculture industry in this effort and show the world, once again, the true strength of the American farmer." Okay, so from those sections, once again we see a lot of language that is absolutist in its presentation, with little to no room for questions or nuance to enter into the discussion. Remember, these are complex topics and they deserve a deeper investigation into the details of what's being discussed. The inclusion of terms like needs and must are indications of a rigid and directed narrative. They're very absolutist. When we see a story that is being presented in this way, we must take a second and pause and factor in the biasing that this form of communication projects. Why would someone speak in these ways? Often, when we hear this kind of language, it's meant to sell us on a particular idea or perspective. Speaking in these absolutist terms like must and needs gets directly to the point that's being made and is thus a potential indication of an underlying agenda. Now, the fact that agendas are present in any type of news reporting is not necessarily the point right now, but rather that we need to be able to be on the lookout for these kinds of tactics which have the potential to manipulate our thoughts. Part of the reason for the presence of these terms in this particular article is likely due to the limitations of the platform itself. We're on the internet, and there's only so much you can add and include in a writing like this. A short piece of writing in any publication will need to be edited to make its larger point. But there's something happening at the operational level regarding the effects of this kind of rhetorical device. It engenders more of that appeal to authority fallacy that we discussed in the last video. If we pass by without factoring in the biasing and bringing that into our overall understanding of what we're dealing with, we are, in a sense, allowing this tactic to affect our thinking. And we'll discuss more on this during the macro discussion, as it can have subtle yet severe effects on our overall worldview when it's taken into a larger contextual framework. Along with the biasing and absolutist language, we see a very vague appeal to the earlier moral responsibility that was presented at the beginning of the article. If we look at the statement from the G7 agriculture ministers, quote, "do what is necessary to prevent and respond to a food crisis." Now, I find this interesting in a couple of ways. One, it makes a claim that is based on an appeal to a group ideal. Now, this kind of appeal, no matter how noble the ideal is something that we must investigate deeply as readers and partakers in reality. There's going to be a lot of underlying context that's hidden within any ideology, and we need to be able to deal with that honestly. Next, we're immediately given an ultra-vague phrase, "do what is necessary." Well, I'm sorry, but I have some questions about that. Who makes up this group of G7 ministers? Do they all agree with one another on the correct course of action regarding the implementation of their ideals? Can we truly know this, or are we meant to assume that they have the best interests of the people that they're meant to serve at the top of their priorities? If we do this, aren't we assuming quite a lot about these people? Why should we think that the G7 is a trustworthy conglomerate of policymakers? What do they deem to be necessary in this context? How are they coming to the conclusions that they're coming to? The answers to all these questions and many more may well prove to be in line with the highest and best moral laws and in agreement with the deepest truths of reality. While that would be amazing, the point here is not that the conclusions wind up to be the correct course of action, but rather that we need to understand the reasons for how and why that is the case. Simply stating that a group of people are in agreement about something that has the potential to be beneficial does nothing to aid in the understanding of the deeper complexities of what is at stake in the context of this article. The point here is to understand what's going on, and this type of vague, generalizing political rhetoric is rampant within our popular discourse, and it's done an immense amount of damage to the social environment that we see today, particularly with respect to engendering an intellectually curious and honest populace. It's important to ask ourselves why that may be the case. What is gained by having a society that is so averse to thinking critically about the world? When doing any type of deeper study, it's wise to take a moment to step back and attempt to see things through a wider lens. This is so that we ensure to remain rooted in the context of whatever it is we're trying to understand. The importance of accurately framing context cannot be overstated in any shape or form. There's a great deal to say on this, and a deep dive on context is worthy of a study in its own right. But for now, it may be of a great benefit to realize that at a macro level of the kinds of media manipulation that we're going to be exploring, there's actually a battle going on for who sets the context at all times. What I mean is that we live each moment framed within our own respective contextual boundaries. These boundaries are set most generally, i.e., foundationally, by the truth of reality. From there, the frame becomes more focused and more specified based on any given amount of factors within any environment. As it pertains to the communication of information, the context is at the mercy of the will of the communicator. Should the communicator have a will that is directed toward the truth, the likelihood of accuracy with respect to the truth claims of the information is going to be high. Thus, we will be set up to be able to frame context well, and relatively speaking, we'll be in good shape with respect to our chances of gaining the best level of understanding possible. Now, on the flip side, if we're being presented information that has in any way, shape, or form been restructured, altered, or obfuscated to suit the will of a presenter who wishes to deviate from the truth, the context will be affected by all of these manipulations, and the overall frame will become distorted. This greatly hinders our chances of attaining an understanding of any set of information that has been affected in these ways. That's not to say that we will understand nothing, rather that if the goal is truth, our path has been blocked. Think of a child who's caught in a lie. In order to avoid the pain of punishment, they'll craft a narrative that seeks to frame the context of the situation to suit their goals of evading the hammer's fall. Well, we'll all learn this survival technique at some point in our lives, and if we're not disciplined and honest, we may well develop it throughout our lives in many super cunning and shockingly devious ways for various reasons, both legitimate and very much not so. Now, since humans have this capacity, it's clear that any endeavor undertaken by humans will be subjected to the contextual designs of whoever happens to be directing the flow of information contained within any endeavor we so choose. We cannot change reality, of course, but we can sure do a lot of damage while we try. Knowing this, we have to realize that due to the fact that we're surrounded by and communicated to through various forms of media at all times, the battle for truth is being fought by any and every entity that is communicating, whether we're aware of it or not. Now, context matters, and the tactics and techniques that we're examining are ways in which it gets framed to suit the will of the communicator. Let's take all of this into account and examine the article as a whole and see if there is a larger context that's being built for us. Diving back in, we must now take the aggregate of what we've looked at before and see what the patterns are showing us. This article is presented as news, which means that it should report facts and truth such that we're able to discern what is real and what is true. Rather than a simple stating of things as they are, we're given a great deal of opinion, emotionally charged rhetoric, assumption, and logical fallacy through appeals to emotion and authority. This is all troublesome, to say the least. How are we supposed to discern fact from fiction when all of this obfuscation and manipulation is present? What's actually going on here? Whatever it is, it's not news. My take is that we're being sold a political ideology, along with a smattering of fear-mongering and a very specific kind of discussion that is aimed at keeping people trapped in an emotionally affected state. When we're thinking from our emotions, we're at risk of losing our connection to things as they actually are. This is very advantageous to someone who's seeking to manipulate the public and engender thoughts through subconscious programming. I have mostly been speaking of this through the lens of its functional application in mass media, but it is ubiquitous in all areas of life, whether it be interpersonal relationships, familial ties, schools, churches, really any environment in which we communicate with each other has the potential to become a very unhealthy breeding ground for lies and falsehood. In the case of this article, we have some very large assumptions present in the fact that war and severe personal strife are looming. It is a severely dishonest and sinister thing to use the intensity of the reality of the situation to further a political ideology through the tactics that we've observed thus far. Now, why is news media run this way? When did it all start? Who and what goals is this kind of sensationalized material meant to benefit and achieve? What can we do to recognize it and not allow it to affect us? So the goal of this exercise in examining this article is to become familiar with the idea that we're susceptible to manipulations and thought control whenever we engage with media sources. Our minds are absorbing information at an extremely high rate of speed and volume. This is truly a wonderful thing, and it means that our capacity is far greater than we likely give ourselves or are even given credit for from others. However, it should be noted that those who would seek to design control mechanisms and mass psychological programming schemes very much understand the depths of human capacity in these ways. One of the reasons that their designs are so effective is due to the high degree of specificity within the systems that they use, which are meant to exploit our innate capacity and cut us off from using it to enrich our own lives and the lives of those we love. Their designs are meant to serve whatever aims they choose, and they do not care who is exploited along the path toward achieving their goals. If you've ever heard the term the elite, this points in the direction of what I'm speaking. There's a certain malignant psychological state that exists among those who would be so bold as to refer to themselves in that manner. And it certainly is not one that's geared toward the kinds of altruism that they would have you believe is present at those levels of society. Thank you for joining me on this little excursion into this article. I know we bounced around a bit and we didn't get into the article as deeply as I want to just yet, but this was a introduction into some of the language, tactics, and concepts that I want to explore further, as well as some deeper philosophical material that I hope will be helpful in the future videos to come. I'm excited to keep going, and we're going to learn a lot more about history, how news media became what it is today, some psychology. We're going to dig into a lot. So stick with me and let's have some more fun in learning about all of this stuff. Thanks very much.